Welcome to MFM and my CSI install understand video. I've tried to include as much detail as I can in the video, from where the resources pages are to find out about CSI, which text editors I use, how to install, how to not overwrite your work when you install an update, how the zones work, some useful actions to program, and there'll be plenty of links in the description. Let's start with the resource pages first. The GitHub page has pretty much everything you'll need to know, frequently updated. I'll put a link to that in the description. On the Reaper forums page, there are two threads, one for people developing and the other one for people who are having problems setting up or new to it. This is a really helpful thread, and a lot of people will try and help you if you're struggling with anything. Just post a question there. I've also dedicated quite a large portion of my channel to CSI and tried to explain as much as I can there. And obviously feel free to ask questions on any of the videos. In true Reaper fashion, CSI is text-based, so often I'll be able to paste into the description my actions so you can copy and paste them into your zone file. I also add links to other useful videos, and I usually go through and make sure that the subtitles are actually correct. I also make video manuals for the download files of any of the effect zones I make. Text editing I knew nothing about whatsoever, and was given some good advice directly from the site. On the Mac I was just using the basic text editor, but was advised to use BBEdit Lite, which is free. And it's really worth your while learning some of the hotkeys and some of the ways of saving you a huge amount of time in repetitive text. The most important thing I learned that I didn't know was the difference between rich text and plain text, or the importance of it when you write in your zone files. This absolutely needs to be in plain text. I didn't realize in rich text there were characters I couldn't see on the screen being added. So now I'm using TextEdit just to open the raw FXzone files to look at them so I can search like this. And when I'm writing files, I use BBEdit Lite and make sure it's in plain text. There are a few ways of finding the installer for this. If you're on the wiki page, a few lines down, CSI projects for Reaper in blue, click on that. This will take you to one of GEOFF, the developer's forum pages. You can see down at the bottom software, stash, you can click on that, take you to the downloader, and below that is a donate link. We'll click on that and go to the download page. A little bit of information about which version of Reaper. There's the download link. And don't bother adding comments or questions below that. Do all that on the forum. Jeff won't have time to see or answer to that here. Okay, we'll click download. As you can see, the file's only 1.31 megabytes, so it's not a huge download. The downloaded file will appear as a compressed file. If you uncompress that, you'll have a CSI folder and a Mac library and a 32-bit and 64-bit PC library. We're going to install these manually into the Reaper folder. On a Mac, that Reaper folder is located here. Depending on your operating system, sometimes this folder is actually hidden, so Shift, Command and full stop will show all hidden files and folders. And then you can go into Application Support Reaper. Drag the CSI folder directly into the Reaper folder and drag the library directly into User Plugins. As you can see, I've got other libraries there, SWS extensions and the rear pack. If you go to my page, MFMreaper, go to the bottom right hand corner of the banner picture, and there's a link there to a great video by John Tidy about downloading extensions, installing extensions. If you see me using actions in the action list as I'm programming that you haven't got in your action list, it's just because I've downloaded more of the extensions from this site. That's the installation out the way. Now let's set Reaper up to use CSI. You go into your preferences, MIDI devices, select the MIDI device that you actually want to use for CSI and disable it. It does seem a bit confusing. CSI is using MIDI information, but it's not doing it via Reaper. So you need to disable the input and output ports of whichever MIDI device you want to use for CSI, and your other MIDI devices can carry on working directly with Reaper. Finally, let's set up CSI in Reaper. So, Preferences, down to Control OSC Web. No devices there at the moment, so click Add. Control Surface Mode, and Control Surface Integrator. On the left hand side of the page, I'll just edit that so I can show you it. You can alter these to change how CSI behaves with Reaper. It's non-destructive. Let me just add one and show you how simple it is. So just give it a page name, what you want the surface to follow, and how you want it to behave. In the right hand box, Surfaces, add MIDI, and we're going to choose the surface that is disabled and we want it to use for CSI. So number of channels is 8, and I want them to start at 0. Number of sends 8, and number of effects on the effects menu I want 8. Then choose the Focusrite, which I disabled previously, and then the surface, which is the MCU for me. And the zone folder usually chooses itself. If it doesn't, you can select another or select the correct one. When you OK that, take a second, then OK that, and CSI is now up and running. Updates generally aren't to the library and the user plugins. They're generally just a CSI folder. But if you make the mistake of dragging that CSI folder into your Reaper folder and overwriting your CSI folder, you will lose everything you've written in it. So a good thing to do first is your own Reaper folder, give it the date, and then compress that. So you know you've got a backup of that in the Reaper folder there. Once you're certain that's done that, bin the CSI folder with the date, drag the new one in, and have a look at what the update contains. You can then copy and paste information back from your zone folders or wherever you want to into the new CSI. If the updated folder causes you problems or doesn't work properly, you can trash it, uncompress your original CSI folder, remove the date so it just says CSI. Go to Reaper Actions, refresh all surfaces, and that will update Reaper to the new CSI folder. Let's have a look at what's in the CSI folder. So the Surfaces folder has MIDI and OSC folders, and in the MIDI folder are the MST files. MST files are where MIDI information is assigned to widgets. Widgets are a reference to the names of your buttons, faders, and rotaries. If you wanted to alter or write an MST file, you could choose a widget, in this case Send, use something like MIDI Monitor or MIDI Aux, press the Send button, and that will tell you in the data channel what you need to know for the MIDI information to program to the widget. There are a good number of pre-written MST files, so you should find one that matches your controller without having to alter or to write one. OSC is internet-based communication devices, not something I've got into, though there are a few people on the forum that are very into this and could help you. Mixmonkey's added some TDR zones for your plugins for you to try. Again, this is to do with OSC and very little to do with me. The CSI file at the bottom there, I've never had to do anything to, but I do know it's worth trashing this file if you've got problems with CSI and rewriting your preferences. So finally we come to the zones folder, which is actually probably the most important folder and the one that I've written into the most. This is another folder that's continually being updated for different devices. If you don't see your device here, the MCU is a good place to start and see what works. I'm going to use the MCU to demonstrate the zones, but it's pretty similar through all the folders. It's possible in Reaper to use a hotkey, open a plugin, and create a zone raw effects file. This will contain all the information you need to write an FXzone for that plugin. I've done a few guide videos about FXzones, but I'll go deeper into how to make FXzones the way I'm making them in a video to follow this. In the description, you'll find a link to an EQ template just to get you started. The 3-track template I'm going to use to demonstrate the zones has one track at the top, sending to bus 1 and bus 2. Those sends will be set at 0, and they'll be post-fader, post-pan. You can think of the zones as rooms in which all of the light switches can be programmed to do absolutely anything, though you do need one button in each room to take you back to another room. The bedsit room, in my tenuous analogy, is called the home zone. This is where you hang your jackets up, sleep, eat, watch telly, and that's the buttons, channels, master track and selected track zone. So when you go to your home zone, you're actually going to 4 zones. The initialization of broadcast is there for if you're using more than one controller. I'm just going to be using one. So first let's look at the button zone, which is part of the home zone. In the stock version of CSI, the button that's assigned to take you to the home zone is the global view button. As you can see, it does more than just one thing, but the first thing it does is take you to the home zone. It also closes all floating effects and effects chain windows, which cleans up the screen every time you go to home zone or press global view. Let's look at the other buttons pre-programmed to take you to different zones, starting with the track button. That will take you to the track SENDSLOT zone. This is really designed for single fader controllers rather than multiple faders. So let's look at that and see how it looks on the MCU. I'll press track button to go into SENDSLOT zone. The upper display still has the name of the track sending from, and the lower of the display now has the name of the track sending to. I can alternate which track I'm sending to with the bank button, and mute is now muting the send to whichever track I've selected. Shift and rotary push on the track, select between post effects and post fader. Pressing global view gets you back to the home zone from the SENDSLOT zone. The send button maps selected track send slots and is designed for multi-channel controllers, such as the MCU. This is how the zone looks once you're in it, and what the displays will look like, and what buttons will work. So let's go through those and have a look. I've selected the channel, I go to send, now I can see what I'm sending to from that channel. Bus 1 and bus 2, I can see the volumes as I move the faders. I can see the pan position as I turn the pans. And the difference here is the control button and rotary push change between post effects and pre rather than the shift button. Also the mute buttons mute the individual sends. And global view takes you back to the home zone. Now if we look in the button zone, part of the home zone, and look at plugin map selected track effects to menu. So pressing this button will take us to this zone. Now we can see what displays and what buttons are going to work in the zone initiated by the plugin button called the selected track effects menu. Rotary push does three things there. It selects the individual effects 1 to 8 by pressing rotary push 1 to 8. And finally, FXSLOT will take you to the FXzone for that plugin. If there's one written, if there isn't, it will just say no map. I've got 3 plugins on this channel, so I press plugin, takes me to map selected track effects to menu zone, and I can still access those plugins by pressing each rotary. I'll show you further on in the video what happens when you've actually got an FXzone written for any one of the plugins you access. I've started a series of video manuals for all of my plugins. From the link in the description, you can just download the FXzone, drop it in your FXzone folder, and use the video as a guide to the layout. Back to the home zone. Instrument in the button zone will map selected track receive slots to widgets. These are the displays, modifiers, and buttons in this zone. This is really useful if you have a specific effects track with quite a few tracks sending to it for you to differentiate between those tracks. I'll explain this as simply as possible. So if I select the bus track, I know that the track above cold track is sending to it. So when I press receive for bus 1, I can adjust the receive for bus 1, which is actually the same as the bus send from the track above. Moving the pan, I don't see anything on the display. Mute, I don't see anything on the display. If I hold the shift key, I can use the rotary push to select between post effects and post fader. If I use the alt modifier, that's how I get to see the pan information when I turn the rotary. So I could turn the rotary without holding the alt key and it would affect the pan, but I didn't get a display for it. And this is why using the modifiers is important to help display what you're actually controlling. The idea of CSI is that it's completely customizable. So quite a few of these buttons aren't programmed to do anything and left up to you to do, as well as the fact that you can change the buttons that are programmed to anything you want them to be programmed to. It can be a little bit to get your head around, say something like the jog wheel. Here it just goes forward and backwards for the grid division. I've turned that into the Goggins wheel. That can do a number of things just by adding the modifier, and then as you go to different zones, you could program it to do completely different things. You can treat CSI zones as multiple action lists and just keep layering up what you want to happen to one button. The actions designated to that button will all happen in the order that you write them. Now let's look at the channel zone, which is also part of the home zone. You can think of this as a channel strip. The display upper is track name display, display lower, track pan display. Fader touch overrides display lower to show the track volume. This is only possible with parts of the controller that are touch sensitive. On the MCU, only the faders are touch sensitive. Rotary push on any channel takes us to the pan width zone. Display lower shows the pan width. Rotary adjusts the pan width. And rotary push will take us back to the channel zone. How that works is like this. If I press rotary 1, that will take me to the pan width zone. I can see that's at 93. If I pull it to the center, it's mono. If I pull it to the left, it's reverse. So I'm going to roll that back up, press rotary again, and that takes you back to the channel zone. The hold feature will give you an alternate action if you hold a button down longer than a second. Show hide children of selected tracks. I assume in the inverted commas that's a guide of what you might put there. It's not actually an action. It didn't work for me if it is. Toggle VCA spill. I don't actually use VCAs. If you do use them, on the wiki page there's plenty of information of how you can use modifiers to make that work. Talking of modifiers, two really useful ones when selecting channels. If you've selected a channel and press shift, it'll select all of the channels in between. If you use the control modifier, you can add or remove individual channels to your selection. I did just mention that holding select didn't show and hide children of the selected track. So I'm going to select these two tracks, shove them up into the track above till they become children. Select the track and hold the select button, and nothing happens. It might be that there's a modifier selected, and there lies the problem with the MCU. There are no lights on the modifiers, so you can't tell if they're on or off. This can make things extremely confusing. Fortunately, there is a solution for this, and I'll point it out later on. First, let's program toggle children tracks. In the action list, search toggle children and select toggle track compact state between normal and tiny. Opposite click, select copy selected action command ID. Back to the channel zone in your text editor and replace in between in the inverted commas. Paste. Now we need to update Reaper with the modifications to CSI. I'll show you how to assign this to a button on the controller in a second, but for now search ref sir for refresh all surfaces, run and close. Now let's test that. Hold the select button down and that should toggle between minimized and maximized states of the children tracks of the selected track. The master track zone is simple enough. I don't use the master track at all apart from putting maybe monitoring effects on. My final output track is a track within Reaper's arrangement. The selected track zone focuses on automation. This is another zone I've never really touched. Generally, I've just modified buttons and channel, FX menu, receive and send. The zoom zone, holding zoom down and turning the rotary forward and backward to zoom in and out. Pressing zoom again, taking you back to the home zone. I don't use this because of the way I work with modifiers, and for me to show you how I do use this, I need to reinstall my own CSI folder. I've trashed the stock CSI folder, uncompressed my CSI folder. That's now in the Reaper folder. Though I've just replaced the CSI folder, it's still got the same preferences in the CSI file as I've been using all along. So I want to check those and check the MIDI. I don't actually need to change anything when I swap the folders. I just need to OK it and OK it. And that will update Reaper to the new CSI information. I assign the Enter key to refresh all surfaces. Search for it in the action list. Opposite click, copy selected action command ID. You could give it a hotkey. I prefer it on the controller. Open the buttons zone file. Command F in my text edit will let me search for the word enter. And there it is. Make sure Reaper with a capital R is before this because it's a Reaper action. And inverted commas, between the inverted commas, paste the action. After the 2 forward slashes, you can create what's called trailing comments, which is basically the name of the action. The forward slashes mean whatever you type won't actually affect any of the commands. You can't actually use this button till you have refreshed all the surfaces manually. So do that from the action list and run it. Takes a second. And then if you want to test it, just press the enter button and you'll see the lights flash, or if the faders are up, they'll bob down and back up again. Now every time you modify anything, you can just press the enter button and it'll update. Resetting the fader volumes to 0 is so handy, especially when you can select multiple tracks and it doesn't move them relatively, it just sets them all to 0. If you want to program this, go into your action list, go into the filter and search for selected vol to 0. If you haven't got the rear pack installed, you won't see this. Opposite click, go to copy selected action command ID. Go back to your buttons file. I want to put this under scrub, so I'll search for that. There it is, Reaper with a capital R, and then paste the action. Now you can update with the enter button on the controller. To eliminate the confusion of modifiers that haven't got any lights, you can double them up with buttons that do have lights. In this case, I'm using zoom, drop, marker and nudge as Shift, Option, Control and Alt. They don't replace, they work as well as. So Shift is lighting up the zoom button. I could press zoom instead of Shift, same thing. Option lights up drop, or I could press the drop button. Control can also be accessed with the marker button. These are latch toggles, so you can hold them down very quickly, they'll go on and off. Hold them down a bit longer, they'll switch on. Or if you hold them down and then release them, they'll switch off after you let go. That's nudge working with Alt. And that concludes the 4 modifiers. I said I would include an FXzone template, so the one I'm going to include is the EQ template. This is the basic layout I use for all my EQs, including stereo EQs. You just need to extract the plugin name, put it at the top, and the first page without any modifiers, just the fader with the display upper and lower. This is faders 1 to 8. So the first fader for the actual effects parameter, the name display and the value display all want to be the same thing. So if we use the Alt key and draw over and write 1, then parameter 1 will be inserted there. Below that are the buttons without any modifiers. Type in no action means no light will come on. If you type effects parameter, the light will come on regardless of what parameter number. Those are on-offs with the 0s and 1s. If you add invert, capital I, FB, capital F and B, plus, that will invert the light status of the button you assign that to. Any parameter on rotary or faders that's stepped, I always put onto the select button as well, no matter how many steps. So here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So say the parameter was 1. Make sure that parameter matches the select button as 1. And then to engage it, type effects param, capital FX and P. My experience has been if I'm not consistent in the way that I program the plugins, I don't actually know what parameters are going to be where as I swap from one plugin to another, and that makes me slower using the controller rather than faster. So if I know that my bass boost is always going to be on channel 2, regardless of the plugin, then I don't feel so much like this. This is something that makes me really happy. To be able to select the envelopes with the jog wheel, add a modifier to magnify that envelope and immediately be able to turn up and down the parameter on that envelope. Go back to selecting the envelope, add a modifier to maximize the TCP so I can actually see what the full envelope names are and select them. Then magnify them, change the parameter, add a modifier, and I'm just changing the parameter within the time selection. In this example, this track has 7 effect sends and the regions are set to the layout of the arrangement. Fast forward's taking me to each region. I can adjust any of the sends, save them. Fast forward to the next region, adjust the sends, save them. If you're interested in this kind of thing, come and check out the MFMreaper channel for more. And finally, a massive thanks to Jeff, who set up the CSI project. If you do use CSI and find it useful, please donate to help Jeff continue the work he's doing. And thanks for watching.